and really appreciate the way you lead us in prayer, mate. Thank you. And thanks to Matt as well. Matt always does an amazing job of summing up what's been kind of happening. He has a kind of a unique ability to tap into ideas and things. And when you were talking about how mothers always do things, Matt, I think that's just a really great thought, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking about the kid who's trying to instruct their mother to play a video game, about being a cool parent to go roller skating, and Matt pulls that idea out. Isn't that a great thought to think about on this Mother's Day? I've got to say, I don't normally speak on Mother's Day, and there's a reason for it, because I always feel like they're a lot better communicators on this particular occasion than myself. But today I feel like I've kind of got a different sort of message on this Mother's Day. So strap in, and I trust that you will find it enlightening, empowering, encouraging. Last week we began a series from the Bible called In the Beginning, about the beginning of events in time and how these events impact our understanding of the very nature of God and the very nature of humanity. If you're interested in my message on creation and God, you can check out that message from last week on our YouTube channel. Just kind of type in CHBC into YouTube and it should come up. Now, every Mother's Day is a day where we give thanks and we celebrate. It's a day where we particularly, I think, recognise the value of mothers in our lives. We know that for the vast majority of people, this is a positive relationship, that there has been an expression of love and sacrifice in own particular ways. We acknowledge these, in my mind, these two things that are going on. We acknowledge this gratitude for what people have done, but we also, I think, particularly want to say to our mothers that we see you, that we value what you have done, because for many mothers, in many ways, it's an unseen job. You think about some of the things that were named by particularly the kids. My mother cleans up. My mother, if I had been writing it when I was a kid, it would have been, my mother, you're an Uber driver. You know what I mean? Like, my mother does these things that for so many are unseen. And so particularly, I think, on this day, we want to say to mothers that we honour you, we see what you do, we value what you do, who you are as a person. And yet I know that in our world today, that there are, for some people, that Mother's Day feels a little bit, it feels a little bit anachronistic. It's kind of, for some, it's a little bit outdated, kind of turning the calendar back 50 years. I can hear the critique. Why value women just for being mothers? They can be so much more. Why is someone's identity and value tied to being a parent? What about others? What about those who don't have children? What about? And you can kind of hear the critique. And the critique is always around this idea about where does identity and value come from? Where does identity and value come from? In our world today, I think that as I live and see and listen, it's almost the thing that I hear more than anything else in this world, people searching for this sense of identity and value in our world. We look around, we see more people than ever feel dislocated, not sure where they fit in, not sure where they kind of come from and where they're going. We see more and more people who feel undervalued and uncertain as to who they are. And I know that for every single person, and it's not just for, if I can say this, not just for mothers, it's for children, it's for guys. Every single person wants to be valued and loved for who they are. We want to have this sense of identity, of knowing who we are. It's kind of like it's inbuilt into our human DNA to want to find that. And so we look, don't we, for value all the time. I mean, you think about like all the different places that we might look for value and meaning and that sense of who we are. Do I have to be, if I want to have that sense of value, do I have to be a Bezos? Do I have to be a LeBron? Do I have to be a Morrison? Do I have to be a model like... Now, if you're my age, you're going to be scratching your head here now, okay? I asked my kids for some help, okay? Because I tried to think about who are the people who are recognised for being kind of like a model.
and the only people I could come up with from like 30 years ago. So my kids tried to help me out here, right? So a model like this particular woman, I think her name's Gigi Hadid. Is that right? No one's helping me. Great. No one's confessing to it. Well, let me tell you, if you think that one's bad, now you're in trouble. Do I have to be as popular as this person? Now, I'm going to do a little sample here. Can anybody put their hand up if they actually know who this person is? I'm seeing about half a dozen hands. Half a dozen hands. And I've got to be impressed, right? I think this person's name is PewDiePie. And this person is the most popular YouTuber in the world. The most popular YouTuber in the world. Or, this is a simple one. Do I have to be a Kardashian? Where does my value come from? Does it come from economics? Does it come from my body? Does it come from my power? Does it come from my popularity? Where does it come from? And I was chewing this issue over in my head a few weeks ago and thinking about identity, and I was thinking about names. You may have heard me make comments about names before. I was heavily impacted by someone many moons ago who shared with me that the most important word in the dictionary is your name, my name, because everybody wants to be remembered. You know how this is. We've all been in these situations. It might happen in a church foyer. It might happen at a kind of a school parents event. It might happen in a sporting setting, or a kind of like a work conference or something like that. You're in the midst of a group of people and you see someone and you go, oh, I know that person. I'd like to go up and say hello to them. But when you think that, you also think, will they know me? Will they remember me? Will they know my name? I don't know what you do. For many people, I think that they probably say, oh, I'm not going to take that step in case I'm embarrassed. I'm humiliated because I want that person. And particularly if that person has some sort of profile, we want that person to know our name. Have you seen the movements in recent times? You know, the hashtag Say Her Name movement. It's a social movement that seeks to raise awareness for black female victims of police brutality, particularly in the United States. But why the name? Why the title? Say Her Name, because it recognizes that the person is important. It recognizes that they have value, that their life has meaning. Because we all want to be known and valued, don't we? But back to my name story, I was thinking about how names, when I was chewing over this, have been used over the centuries to help define our identity. In ancient times, names were reflected in a person's character. So a name was often given because it was almost like an expectation of what that person would be like. And so in a very simple example, in the Bible, the guy Simon is renamed Peter because it's saying something about his character. You'll be called Peter because it literally means rock. It means that you will be steadfast. You will be something that will be built on. So your name means something. The name Andrew means strong. Obviously, my parents were very insightful when they gave me my name. I just think it was kind of like the most popular name that was around at that particular time. I'm sure I never went through a school class which another kid in the class was not named Andrew. I'm not sure I've seen a child under the age of 25 who has the name Andrew. You know how things are. They go in and out of vogue, don't they? But for some people it represents character, but some names represent kind of your origin. My two daughters, their middle names are named after their grandparents. It tells them something about where they come from. Some people have the same name as their parent, you know, their name's something junior, or the third, or the fourth when you get into what for many Aussies I think feels maybe a little bit pompous. Some surnames speak about where people comes from. You know, like one of the most popular names in Australia, surname Johnson. It's John's son. I live on Richard's Son Street. Names tell us where we come from. Some people's names are derived from work. My wife and I were playing a little game think about all the names which in a sense tell people what they do. So we said there are Smiths and Tanners and Brewers and Coopers and Millers and Farmers. They literally told you their identity from what was derived from their work. Some people change their name. You know, people who have changed their name, it represents a new life. I don't like my past, what I've done or who I was labelled by, and so I've changed it to a new name. Have you seen the resurgence in tattoos? Massive resurgence in popularity of tattoos, and I've got to say, I'm always fascinated when I meet someone in that space who has a tat, and the reason why I want to know, because it tells me something about the person. Children's names, images, what's a part of their identity. In fact, as I understand it, in the modern history of tattoos, they were derived primarily from sailors. Sailors who would have a specific tattoo because, you get this, if they fell overboard off the ship and the body was recovered, they could tell who the person was by their tattoo. It said, who is this person? What is their identity? And on this Mother's Day, I want to particularly acknowledge that women have more struggles in the space of identity and value in our world. More struggles. And I trust, and my hope and my prayer is that as we work through this time, that you would understand this sense of value that comes from God. You know, we live in a world that thinks it's enlightened, apparently, that all are valued and significant, and yet when we open our eyes, we see the dichotomy between what we say and what we do. I mean, look at the struggles today, the issues that are rampant across society. There was a report just issued in this last week about the denigration of women umpires on the footy field. I was listening to another parent in this past week about how in schools there's currently a bit of a crisis going on because there is rampant disrespect towards female teachers, particularly from teenage boys coming out of COVID. We see shameful action in Parliament, in workplaces, strewn across news reports. The statistics surrounding the abuse of women and escalation of violence during COVID-19 is horrifying. You know that apparently, as I read some stats, nearly 1 in 20 women was assaulted sexually or physically by a current or former partner in the space of 3 months. In the space of 3 months, in the first 3 months of lockdowns. 2/3 of them for the first time. There was a 2/3 increase in the demand for emergency accommodation. 130% increase in the rise of family violence. We should be sickened by these stories and statistics. We claim that we live in a world which values everybody, and yet something is wrong. They ought to horrify us because every statistic is a person. They're not numbers. They are women, mothers, daughters, sisters, friends. And our world is caught in this conundrum. There is this tension between this sense that we live in a world that in many ways is without some meaning, survival of the fittest. I mean, it's almost like in some ways we feel like we've turned the world into the Serengeti, where there's a migration of wildebeest and there's, you know, lions picking off the old and the injured and the lame, picking them off. Between that and wanting to value people. And I'm thankful that that understanding of picking off the weak, in a sense, is not the prevalent attitude, even though we see it happen all the time. So where does this understanding, this desire that we recognise the value of every human come from, is the question I want to ask you today. Last week I shared about how the biblical account of creation in Genesis 1 and 2 speaks about the nature of God. Today I wanted to ask how, and show to you how at its core it also speaks about the nature and value of humanity. And in Genesis 1 we read these two verses. It says, God says, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They'll reign over fish in the sea, birds in the sky, livestock, wild animals of the earth, and small animals scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. And in the simplest terms, this is a declaration that every human being, every man, every woman, is made in the image of God. Every man, every woman is valuable. And I want to hear, I want to hear, I want you to hear me say that to you today. If you're a mother, great. If you're not a mother, that's fine. If you're a guy, that's great as well. The creator of the God of the universe, the source of love and life, says that you are valuable. That your worth is not determined by your work. It's not determined by your economic prowess, your physical state. It's not determined by your gender, your ethnicity, your popularity, your power. It says that your worth, you are intrinsically valuable, whoever you are. Our search for meaning and worth, our search for identity is satisfied in this truth, that God made you in His image. Our search is satisfied in that truth. What does that mean? You know, the precise meaning of that term, the image of God, or if you're fancy in Latin, you might have seen Imago Dei, for example, pronounced somewhere, and you've wondered what that's about, has been something that has been explored in a variety of different ways for centuries. Obviously, we do not look like God. God is spirit. We have material bodies. Sometimes we ask, well, maybe it's like when we say, well, you're just like your father, or, you know what I mean, like your daughter's just like you. Is it like in character or personality? And there's a bunch of things that we can kind of explore in that. Here's a few key ideas that I want to share with you just briefly. What it is to be part of the image of God. We would say that we have the ability to know things, our cognition, our capacity as humans for rational thought. When you think about sometimes when we say the things that make us human, you think about these ideas are often expressed. Things like we have the ability to reason, mathematics, language. We have the ability to feel laughter and emotions, to care and have empathy, to express ourselves in music and art. The most significant theologian of the first 1,000 years of the church, St. Augustine, wrote these words. He said, man's, and I'm sure if we were writing it today, we'd also write women's excellence consists in the fact that God made him to His own image by giving him an intellectual soul, which raises him above the beasts of the field. We have this ability to think. Not only that, there's another dimension to us as humans, is a spiritual dimension. Our capacity for a relationship with God. And Thomas Aquinas views as an aptitude and an understanding of a loving God. And it was expressed in one of the Catholic catechisms this way. It says, of all the visible creatures, only man is able to know and love his Creator. He alone is called to share by knowledge and love in God's own life. It was for this end that he was created. This is the fundamental reason for his dignity, to be able to know, respond, love God. I've always liked this particular verse from Ecclesiastes, which says that God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. Eternity in the human heart. There's this sense that as human beings, we all have this understanding and desire to know about something beyond the 80 years of this world. To think, to contemplate. And as they would say, to enter into a relationship with the living God. To know, but not only to know the things that are part of this world, but to know beyond this world. And finally, we would say as part of that, what it means to be in the image of God is to understand that we are called to be a part of the mission of God. The phrase, the image of God, was used to describe the kind of the many statues of deities that were set up around the towns and cities of the pagan ancient world. The statues that set up were regarded as representatives of the divine being that they were kind of meant to point to. They were called images of God. That image was meant to be a representative of God. And so you can put those two together, can't you? To see that if humans are made in the image of God, we are to be the representatives of God in this world. His living images, called to live that out. The renowned Christian scholar N.T. Wright puts it this way. He says, "It seems to me that God has put humans like an angled mirror in his world so that God can reflect his love, care, and stewardship of the world through humans, so the rest of the world can praise the Creator through humans." So it's not even a matter in the sense of just who we are, but also what we do. To live as representatives of the living God. The image of God. God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Do you believe that today? When you look in the mirror and you doubt yourself in a sense, that you have any value or meaning, and I'm sure that among us today, whether we're here in person or online, I'm sure there's people who feel like that. Feel like we're of little worth. Feel like we're the shortest in a crowd which everybody else overlooks. Do you believe that you're made in the image of God? That God made you with love and care, exactly as who you are. No mistakes. You're not meant to be 6'6" or 5'2". You're meant to be your height, your colour, your look, with your capacities. You're not meant to be anybody else. The Creator of the heavens and earth made you and declares that you're valuable. You see, this is the declaration that is here at the beginning of time, for all of humanity, that you're to be valued. And in fact, I would say to you that this fundamental belief is actually a bedrock of our modern Western society. It is a bedrock of modern human rights. Or in fact, all of human society in the West in particular is impacted by this, regardless of whether a person has any personal faith or belief in the truths of Christianity. Before Christianity penetrated wider in this world, children were discarded when they weren't wanted, left to die effectively by the side of the road. But in response to the directives of Jesus, orphanages began to appear, began to express, you know what, every child is worthwhile. Once upon a time, disabled people were left on the rubbish dumps of a town, as horrific as it sounds. But this understanding that every child, I have a nephew of mine, Liam is his name, he has Down syndrome. Liam would be left behind in any survival of the fittest world. But as part of our world, we celebrate that he is cared for and loved. Why is he cared for and loved? Because he is made in the image of God. The least of these are cared for and loved. This rule, this principle, this command, this truth applies to every single person, regardless of your ethnicity, your gender, your education, your socio-economic status, that every single person has inherent value and dignity. Worth is not determined by achievement. And this is a fundamental belief of Christianity. It should be a fundamental belief of the church, and yet I've got to say sometimes it really isn't lived out. As I think about on this Mother's Day, the cry that the church is sexist has not always been without merit. Sometimes there has been a history of really detrimental patriarchy, suppression of others, particularly women. Some have been discriminated, some harmed, some people have tried to use the Bible to suppress. Tragically, it's happened on many levels. And yet, if we were to cast our eyes towards Jesus, we would see something that is in stark contrast. And Jesus, the one who lived in a time when rabbis of the day would pray, God, I thank you that I am not a woman. In contrast, Jesus elevated the role of women. Elevated the role of women. Women would sit at his feet and listen in a day when women weren't considered worthy of being a student in any other place. Women were one who's walked alongside him as key supporters, helped to fund their mission, shared close friendship, were close confidants. I mean, who was there at the cross? The men had scattered, only John's left there, but there's other women who were there supporting him. At the resurrection, women were witnesses in an age when they weren't considered witnesses in a law court. Women were sent out as carriers of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus, empowered to lead in that way. This was radical stuff in the times of Jesus, carried out by him. And it speaks to that value of each person, the value of women. In a report issued in June 2021, the Anglican Church was found to have a serious, dangerous problem with women. It expressed how inside the church many people had been subject to abuse, and in fact in parts of it had been subject to more abuse than the wider population. It was a stunning finding to think that what should be a place of refuge was a place of peril. You read further in the report and you can sadly read about how clergy had ignored some of the cries of people. And here we say that we believe that our Christian faith is meant to be one of mercy and love and acceptance. And read the opposite. How can that be found in this place? So conflicting with Jesus. So I want to say to people today, in our church community, maybe we can be a place that lives out what Jesus did. Not just theory, but proactively. It means for those of us who are leaders that we never tolerate any lowering standards of support and care, of place. No boys just joking around. Men set an example for younger men of respect and love. You know, I recently read how it's reported that 1 in 5 young men think domestic violence is a normal reaction to everyday stress or frustration. Surely we should be a place that helps to change those attitudes. Not just put up with them, but helps to change them. The domestic violence that tragically goes on in our neighbourhoods, in our streets here. I want you to know here, right now, that we will not turn our head aside. We will not ignore. And I want to say publicly, if there's someone in that place at the moment, if there's someone in that place and maybe you feel ashamed, maybe you feel like you won't be trusted, then I trust that we will listen. We will do all that we can to help. That we will stand up not just in theory but in life. And I want to call to each person here that we live that out in our workplaces, in our homes, in our recreation, in our friendships, that we would live that out. Because we believe fundamentally that every single person is made in the image of God. Every single person is of worth and value. And on this Mother's Day, we celebrate mothers, and it is fantastic to do, but, I know, I've listened to my own mother say, it's great to be celebrated one day a year, but unfortunately there's 364 others. But that we will continue to do it in each day that we do it. The search for identity and meaning is part of the journey of every single human being. And we read these verses today that are impactful, that are, I believe, life-changing in every single way. And I want to say to us very simply as we finish up, these very simple truths. Today we are reminded of the value of each person, all made in the image of God. And I ask you, can we live that way in how we love others and how we understand ourselves? Today we remind ourselves to be thankful and honour the mothers of our community. But also today we remind ourselves that all women are to be honoured in every aspect of life. Let's pray, shall we? Our God, we thank you that you are a God of love. You don't make mistakes. You made every person here as you intended to. Every person here with care and delight, with wonder. Father, I pray for each one of us here that we would understand and know that truth. And God, we pray that we would not only know it for ourselves, but that we would see it in others. That we would value and honour all. Particularly value and honour those who are most vulnerable and are least cared for. Father, we pray that your Spirit would change our hearts where they need changing. Give us courage where we need courage. Compassion where we need compassion. And we pray that in such a way as we live, that we would truly live as representatives of the God of love and life, that we would live out what it is to be made in the image of